So we've laid out the four reasonable cobs of each variety, and we put them in order of the company's designated CRM. But the CRM is an indicator of when the variety is going to get to a physiological maturity, not when it's going to be ready to harvest. But it's an indicator. But with grain, and particularly in limiting season like Tasmania, we're really mostly interested in when are we going to get to harvest. So what's the dry down? So when we're looking at these, and CRM's an indicator, so you can look at these here just on colour, and we'll break them open and chew them, but just on colour, which is a bit of an indicator of where the starch is at. The asterisk is definitely the most developed, and it should be. It's at 85 CRM. The 9400 is probably is certainly less mature. It's a 94 CRM. The Obelix is a similar CRM, but it's more mature. And CRMs are awkward for the companies, so you can't really hold seed companies to absolutely CRMs. They're an indicator. And then 9911, which is a 99 CRM, is the longest maturing in the group. Theoretically, the higher the CRM, the longer the crop grows, the higher the yield potential. And that would be side by side, if nothing else was limiting, that's how they'd line up as well, roughly. So then you're looking at, you want to get this to dry down, so you want to get this to 25% moisture or less, so you can actually get it off with a header. It's got to get to physiological maturity first. Physiological maturity is indicated by black layer, and this asterisk is getting very close. So you can see a darkening of the layer there. So that's basically hitting black layer now. And then if you chew up from the tip of the kernel to the surface of the kernel, you should be hitting a hard starch layer. And on asterisks, that hard starch layer is about halfway down the kernel. If you're making silage, that'll be ready to take for silage in about 10 days' time. So on 9400, again, you're looking for black layer. This won't have any black layer forming. You can tell from just the colour of the grain, it hasn't formed its black layer yet, so it's still building kernel. And then there's no hard starch in that at this point. This is Obelix. So these are supposedly the similar CRM, but the Obelix looks more advanced. It's getting very close to the black layer. So you got to peel that tip back, and you can see it's starting to form its black layer now. It's brown, but it's forming. And hard starch is a bit behind, so it's maybe one third down the kernel. Roughly 1/3 way down the kernel. So it's quite a bit ahead of 9400, but it's behind asterisks. Then we go to the longest maturing, the 100 CRM, or sorry, 99 CRM, which, again, it's pale, and that's an indicator it's not mature yet. It's not starting to harden the starch. Hasn't got a black layer forming yet. And when you chew it, hasn't got any hard starch. But the cob development on all of them is good. They've all tip filled reasonably. There's nothing wrong with having a slight tip blanking. A slight tip blanking like this. That means that the population was at a point where nutrition probably ran out a little bit. But if you drop the population too low, where everything fills perfectly, it probably hasn't maximised its yield potential. So you've got to get the crop to physiological maturity, which is black layer, and then you've got to get it dried down. So this asterisk and this Obelix is probably somewhere in the order of 2 weeks to black layer. Remember, we went in and picked 4 or 5 good cobs, so you've actually got to go in and have a look at your average. There's a lot of other small cobs around, but still, they're roughly 2 weeks off physiological maturity, and then you're looking for dry down, and that will depend on how the crop dries down and the weather that we're going to get. Yep. And there's big differences in dry down. The harder the grain, the slower it is to dry down. So catch-22 on, say, asterisks versus, say, something like Obelix, is the grain on Obelix is actually softer than asterisks. So this is a European flat, which has got extremely good cold tolerance, but it's actually slower to dry down than Obelix.
Yeah.
So what we've seen so far is that Obelix at a 94 CRM is actually getting to point of harvest at the same time as that 85 CRM, which won't be the case for all 85 CRM varieties. We should be able to get other 85 CRMs, maybe with a softer kernel style, that will dry down quicker than